Turns out Dad had clipped her picture out of a movie magazine and just said, one day I want to meet her.
So what sealed the deal for your mom?
And he said, yeah, I'll leave what I'm doing and come out, be your date if you'll marry me. And he said on that phone call, she said, yes, your people, your only true strategic advantage.
You can have companies that have beautiful buildings and great facilities, but if you don't have good people, you don't have a good business.
People want to know how much you care before they care how much you know. We are just wired to desire to be loved and respected.
Some conversations were never meant to be recorded. This one was. Dick Schultz, University of Iowa basketball coach, ran the NCAA, and led the United States Olympic Committee. Kevin Crampton, author of Tuned, former CEO, who has led billion-dollar deals around the globe and credits Dick as his greatest mentor. Welcome to Toon Talks.
Well, great. Hans, welcome to Toon Talks. Just a little bit about Hans's background. Hans has been chairman of the board of Helmerich & Payne since 2012 and has been a director since 1987. He was chief executive officer of H&P from 1989 through March of 2014. After retiring from his role as chief executive officer, Hans served as a consultant at H&P from 2014 through 2018. Hans currently serves on the board for the New York Stock Exchange company Coterra Energy, and then previous board experience with Cimarex Energy, Atwood Oceanics, the Northwestern Mutual Life Insurance Company, and the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City. His community service includes past chairman of Gilchrist Museum's National Board, the Indian Nations Council, Boy Scouts of America, and the Tulsa Community Foundation. So Hans, what would be interesting to start off with is maybe the story, the journey along the way from how you grew up, who was impacting your life, how'd you navigate that as you kind of walk through that? That would be great to start with.
Well, thank you. First of all, it's great to be with you and Dick, and I'm already a fan of this program and listening to Toon Talks, and then of course I'm a big fan of your book. I love the combination of business and faith, and just the notion that you can apply your life journey and your faith journey into your vocation. I think that's an important theme that you brought out, Kevin. So yeah, this will be fun for me, and I'm happy to tell you a little bit about my own story. Sometimes I picture my wife.
You have an hour
running that I tell the short version and not the long version. So you can help me try to do that. It won't take that long. So I'm a long time Oklahoman. My granddad on the maternal side was the first U.S. Marshal in Oklahoma. He oversaw or helped. I'm not sure you can call it overseeing, but the Oklahoma land rush. And then he was prominent Oklahoma City, Charles Colcord family. And then my granddad married into that. My granddad was a early aviator. So he flew with Bill Skelly and, had so many. Aviation is a big part of Oklahoma's history. So my granddad was part of aviation until he switched over to the energy business and the rig business. I'm not sure which ended up being a harder business, the energy business or the aviation business. But then I have a story that he married my high school sweetheart, and she was from Tulsa. I like to say we had 5 Tulsa babies, and then they had 10 Tulsa grandbabies. So we had 10 grandkids, all of them in Tulsa. And it's been a great time to be able to be in Tulsa that many years and for that many different generations. So that's part of the story. And then,
well, why don't we start with the the Hollywood starlet story? I mean, that's that you said there's some angles that may not be known by a lot of people.
yeah, that's a fun that's a fun story. My mom was under contract for Universal way back. Gosh, this would have been in the 50s. And the movie that is probably she's best known for is Harvey with Jimmy Stewart. She ended up, gosh, I think making 10 movies for Universal. Bright Victory was another great movie that she starred in. And yeah, so she's had, it was a short career because she was convinced that once she got married, it was time to quit work and go start a family. And that's what she ended up doing. I'm one of 5 boys. So I had 4 brothers. She was a great boy mom. And yeah, she and dad both provided a great home for us. But the way people like the story, the way they met, my dad was at school in Boston at the Harvard Business School. His roommate was a big producer on Broadway, which at the time was kind of a bigger deal than Hollywood. And I mean, that was where a lot of talent went. And he and his roommate would call the roommate's father and get portfolios of the best actresses that he knew on Broadway. And then they would actually have a chance to go up and meet them and date them. So the way he would tell the story is, boy, he had a great thing going. He went to an opening in New York, Women Prefer Blondes, and Universal wanted Mom there. They both sat at the same table, coincidentally. Both of their respective dates were trying to get the attention of the producer during the evening, and so they decided to dance with each other. So they did, and Dad said, I actually have seen you somewhere before, but I don't know where. And she goes, well, yeah, that's a terrible opening line. And they laughed, and she said, no, I think I've seen you before too. So here they are on a dance floor in New York, and both of them are having this conversation. Well, it turns out Dad had clipped her picture out of a movie magazine and taped it to his vanity mirror just on his sink basin, and just said, one day I want to meet her. And, he had all these other opportunities, so it kind of blurred together, but he actually had her picture on his sink basin. And then she had gone to Gulfport College, where Dad was stationed not too far away at LSU at officers training school there. And he would drive over. She was younger, undergraduate, but he would drive over. And because it was so hard to get liquor during the war, he would bring the house mom bourbon, and then she would let him date and Mom just remembers seeing him come to the dorm and take out upperclassmen. So they had both actually met separately from that. And after that night, he was still in Boston. She was in LA. So he would take the red eye, which was just, prop plane that would leave Boston, fly all night, and head out to LA and try to date her and try to get her to marry him, which he finally was successful in doing. So, yeah, it's a fun story. Each of them have a little different angle on telling that story.
So what sealed the deal for your mom? What sealed the deal?
Yeah, that's a good question. So when Bright Victory opened, President Eisenhower, it was a great film. I think it was Bill Holder that was the other lead, and it was about a young soldier who had been blinded in World War II and went to a VA hospital. Mom's role was a nurse in that hospital, and they become friends, but he's really wanting to go to his hometown and marry his high school sweetheart. But the father and even the girlfriend had kind of changed their mind in light of him having been blinded. And so the movie develops where they end up falling in love. It's a fun movie. Well, Eisenhower wanted to do the opening at the White House, and he said, and the studio said, "You've got to bring a date out here." And Mom and Dad had kind of broken up. Well, they had broken up, but Mom thought, well, Walt would be a good one to bring out as my date for this opening. So when she called him to do that, he was working for H&P. I think he says he was in North Dakota at the time. And he said, yeah, I'll leave what I'm doing and come out and be your date if you'll marry me. And he said on that phone call, she said yes. And I thought, how on earth, Mom, did you say yes just with
wow,
that type of invitation and phone call? But that's how he sealed the deal.
So did you say that there was because again, it's the Tulsa version of Grace Kelly and Prince Rainier. So did you mention that there was your mom had a Grace Kelly?
Oh yeah, the Grace Kelly tie-in that I like a lot is Universal was shocked that Mom was going to leave and basically right at the end of her contract go back to Tulsa. And so they were trying to convince her not to do that. And at that time, she had grown in popularity. She had been on the cover of Life magazine, which was a big deal back then. And they were trying to convince her not to. But when she said no, they thought, well, we've actually got a couple movies in the can. We need to go find your lookalike. We need to go find kind of your replacement. And that national search is what discovered Grace Kelly. So Grace Kelly stepped in as far as Universal was concerned and kind of took over from Mom's movie career.
And one of the, as you look at your resume, as you know, I worked at Ford Motor Company for a long time, and you started as a director, I think, about the same time Bill Ford did. So I think you're about the same age. So maybe you can talk a little bit about your role in the company and how that kind of evolved over time, and how was that journey?
Yeah, happy to do that. And you've been a great help for us on the Helmerich and Payne board. And I remember when we first talked and we were talking about your career at Ford and all the different opportunities you had. One of the tie-ins we had is I was friends also with Jim Hackett, which ended up running Ford for a little bit. And so it was fun to just share those kind of stories. And Jim became kind of a mentor to me, certainly a friend, and provided some help and insight. But yeah, my story with the company started, I think, just growing up around the kitchen table. Dad made business sound fun, and he loved the competitive nature of it. He loved the importance of just strong values that work in all of life, right? Not just in business. So he was very intentional with 5 boys about, hey, it's important that you tell the truth, that you take responsibility for what you're doing, that you work hard, that you give your very best effort, whether it was in sports or business. So he was always making that an important message. And I always thought, gosh, well, it would be fun. And then my granddad started the company in 1920. So I thought, boy, what a great place to start. I had worked some summers at the company, and I thought, coming out of school as an undergraduate, I was already married, Kevin. So I was thinking, number one, I needed a job. And number two, I thought, well, this would be a good place to park for a little bit. And then maybe I'd go back to business school and decide what I really wanted to do when I was a grown-up. But I ended up in 81 joining the company full-time. Leah and I had just come back. We'd been in Venezuela right after we were married. The company had 25 plus rigs running in Venezuela. We had a small oil camp with some trailer homes in Naco, Venezuela. I know you've had a lot of international postings, and that was a really great time for us because we just were young in our marriage, and it was both of our families lived in Tulsa. It was just nice being away from everybody and having some time together. But started in 81, and of course this is a cyclical business, so at that time energy was roaring and things were looking up. We were adding rigs, and then of course one of the several down cycles occurred not long after that. But I remember at the time thinking, well, actually this is a great time to learn this business is in a down cycle. And the things that were working when oil prices were up and things were good, all of a sudden everything was on the table to examine and look at. So it ended up being a great time to learn the business. And I remember Dad saying, well, he was at that time in his 60s, and he said, I'm not going to wait around. You can go back to school, but what you ought to do is learn as much as you can here. So that's really what made the most sense for me to do. And I worked with him. It ended up being over 30 years together. We had an office just separated by an assistant that we shared. And so part of the real joy of my career was working so closely with my dad.
So a great mentorship type of relationship then.
Yeah, it really was. And I can remember, at school, some of my friends saying, it must be nice you're working for your dad. And I would laugh at that, but then I would think, in all of human history, so 7,000 years, where typically it's only been in the last 100 or so years that almost all of us would have grown up on a farm, worked for our dad, and that would have been our life story. So the notion of having, and of course so much has changed now, and that now becomes the exception and not the rule. But there's some great principles, like you said, having your dad not only as a father, but also as a mentor, where, part of mentorship in my mind is that mentor really caring about someone, wanting to see them succeed, wanting to teach them important lessons, providing the correction and, the lessons that they picked up along the way. So it was a great blessing for me to have that opportunity to work so closely with him. We got along well. He would tell me stories about it. He and his dad would often fight and get in these big disagreements, but he and I really had a great relationship that I was a fortunate beneficiary of. So always been appreciative of that.
Well, it's really important to have that good relationship with your parents, especially your father. And many times people don't realize how important that is. My dad got me started working when I was still a teenager and still in high school. And he had a cold storage facility business and had a ice house across the street. And in the summer, why the ice house was pretty important because so many people then in those years had ice boxes, and they had to have ice in. They didn't have refrigerators because there wasn't electricity in the country. So I ran that ice house, and that was my business. And whatever I earned off that, that was my lot to live on when I was a teenager. And that was a great lesson to learn at a young age. And a lot of people can learn from their fathers if they'll just give them a chance.
Boy, that's true, Dick. And that's a great story. And, I've just been the beneficiary of not only my dad as a mentor, but on my wife's side, her family was from Beaver, Oklahoma in the Panhandle, and they went through the Dust Bowl, and her dad and I had a great relationship. So, yeah, learning from a father is just such an important opportunity. And, we're in a culture today where that's becoming more rare. And, so many young men today grow up without a father or an absent father in some way. And so they're missing out on just so many lessons to be learned, conversations that you just have along the way with a father. And so I don't take it for granted that I had that experience. And I think it's also motivated me to be involved kind of in paying it back in a way, or paying it forward, where I've really enjoyed a mentoring role and trying to help others, because boy, my story is one of really receiving just a lot of help and instruction for mentors that were in my life.
So here you are in 1989, and you are the new CEO. Pretty young guy. Why don't you tell us about that transition and how that kind of evolved, and then how was it being a young CEO like that?
Yeah, well, it was a little bit scary in lots of ways, a little bit surprising. I mean, you and I, Kevin, are working through a succession exercise now with H&P, and you've been on other boards, and I have too. We've both seen, and today those are very intentional, elaborate, multi-phased affairs. Mine was not adorned that way. I was really kind of caught by surprise, and I was young. I think I was 28 or 29 at the time, and so I thought it was going to be something that was going to happen later on. Dad stayed as chairman. I tried to have him be a lot more active in those early years than he really wanted to be. But, what made it work, and it's often true with successions today, is we just had a great group of people and a great team of folks. And so I was blessed with guys that were willing to stay and keep their shoulder to the wagon and help. And so that made it possible. But it was, it was a little bit of a surprise. And then, I knew too that I was going to have a lot different leadership style than Dad. He had grown up with a military experience and kind of a command control approach. And I realized we were going to have to figure out how to take a much broader team approach and figure out how to make that work, and, bring the talent to bear that we were going to need to what ended up being a fun growth story that came after that.
So you navigated that for 25 years in the chair, right? As a CEO.
It was a long run. And of course, we're in just a very cyclical business. So we follow the ups and downs of the oil price and natural gas prices. And when prices are up, our customers want to keep as active as they can and see us grow. And then when prices go down, as we know they do, then we're one of the first folks to get kicked to the curb, because all of a sudden, they don't want to make the investment in finding more oil and gas. So it becomes a very up and down cyclical business, and challenging in that way.
So you're going through these multiple chaoses, because that's what they are, right? So how did you manage that? How did you navigate that? What support network did you use? How did you get through those? Because they kept coming, and they're unpredictable. How did you get through all that?
Yeah, well, I think that, part of that is having and building a culture that isn't so shocked or surprised by change, right? And so people in the business and our business understood that, and they understood some of those risks and some of what the roller coaster ride was about. But I think there were some basic things that we got right. First of all, we just put a lot of emphasis on building the company around a great culture and great people. And I can remember one time, gosh, hadn't been in the role very long as CEO, and a friend of mine said, hey, one of his mentors, I'm just trying to remember who took me out there, but Peter Drucker was one of his mentors, and we went out and spent the day, and there were just 3 or 4 of us on the trip, and we just spent the day with Peter Drucker. And I can remember him saying, your people are really your only true strategic advantage, that even technology or historically resources, capital strength, capital resources were so important, but he made a convincing case that those things, soon can be taken up by your competitors. The hardest thing for your competitors to match is the quality of your people and the quality of your culture. It's kind of that notion of culture eats strategy for lunch. And I just was a real believer in people before me at the company really just put such an emphasis on strong people. So I think that would be, the first real building block. I think after that, we had a conservative balance sheet, and we had debt before in our history. And I think learned the lesson that, boy, it's a cruel master when the business turns away from you. So it really built in a notion that, hey, let's not have a lot of leverage or a lot of debt exposure. So that was important. And then I think, the other thing was just a real emphasis on what is the value proposition we're bringing to the customer, and what problems are we solving for the customer, and why do they value us as a supplier. And we did everything we could, Kevin, to get that part right, because even in the downturns, your favorite, from a customer standpoint, they still want some activity and they want to use their very best supplier. So it becomes a discriminating time for them. And it really historically was an opportunity for us to gain market share and work in closer into those relationships. So those are some of the things that come to mind that helped us.
Well, Hans, one of the important points that you made there is so important. You can have companies that have beautiful buildings and great facilities and everything else, but if they don't have good people, they're not going to be very effective, because when it comes right down to it, it doesn't make any difference whether it's a college or university or a sales company or a tech company. If you don't have good people, you don't have a good business. And the thing about good businesses, they have good people.
I think that's really true, Dick. And, I think the thing that I'm probably proudest of with the company and looking back is how many people we have that just choose to make H&P their career and life work. And so every year we have an annual award ceremony that we recognize long service, and each one of those will have a handful of 40 plus year employees, and we'll have a bigger group of people that have been with us 35 years, 30 years. I need to check the most current numbers, but it's recently I know that we had 75 people that had over 35 years at the company. And then we had a much broader group that had over 20. And so, part of that, it requires both sides of mutual trust to have that work. They have to make a great contribution to the company, and then the company has to be fair to them. And that's what makes that combination work. But I was always very, very proud that we were able, and it was important. It was important for really our business strategy, because you don't pick up a textbook and learn how to run a drilling rig, but we can teach you to do that. And having people that are around that have learned how to do that and then end up contributing a lot of great ideas and work to the company, and then they become mentors. And we just have so many, really hundreds of stories where that was true. One of the great cultural strengths we have is a very strong mentoring dynamic at the company. And it just shows up in so many great ways.
One of the amazing business phenomenon over the last 25 years has been America's resurgent energy independence. It's almost miraculous versus 25 years ago, and people were talking about it's all over. We're in decline. We're going to have to be dependent upon foreign sources. H&P, through innovation, has played an amazingly important role in that. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, happy to. And I think you're right. I think that the energy story, and particularly America's role in innovation, is an unappreciated part of it. I think history is going to be a lot kinder to the energy business 20 and 30 and 50 years from now than maybe we appreciate today. But you're right, Kevin. You know, our dependence on OPEC and foreign oil was increasing, you know, after the oil shock in the 70s and then all through the 80s. And the notion was, of course, you're producing a depleting resource. And so you not only had to be able to replace what our customers were producing all the time, but you also had to be able to respond to higher demand. And the real breakthrough, I think, came with this whole notion of unconventional drilling, and to be able to go into a lower quality rock, but be able to overcome the challenges of, instead of just drilling straight down vertical wells, to be able to drill horizontal wells where you would be able to expose that wellbore to much more of the producing rock. You know, if you think about putting a straw in something and you have just that pay zone that you're exposed to, versus being able to turn a corner in that pay zone that might only be 10, 20, 30 feet thick, but stay in that pay zone for what today has gone to 4 or 5 miles. So, you know, just picture in your mind being able to have the extended reach of going 10,000 feet deep, making a turn, and then going 4 or 5 miles vertically, exposing that wellbore. So really, it was a revolutionary technology. It had been done some in offshore wells and projects. We are a leader in bringing that technology on land in the land drilling business. And so, you know, today we have a fleet that drills over 1,400,000 feet of hole every week. And it's the technology that has enabled that to happen. And it's a joint effort. We, as you know, helping us on the board, you know, we bring a lot of engineering to bear. The customer brings lots of solutions to bear. It's a real partnership. But being able to go into that lower quality rock and extract a much higher percentage of the hydrocarbons in place has just been such a game changer. So you mentioned it, but the U.S. was falling underneath 10 million barrels produced a day, and it looked like it would be half of that in several years. And since then, we now lead the world in oil production with over 13 million barrels a day. And it really has been a great success story.
And what we've learned of late, right, with with the Chinese taking advantage of cornering these rare earth minerals, how important it is strategically to control your natural resources, your access to energy. I think that we're now starting to fully understand the implications of not having capabilities in these key areas. And thank goodness, a lot of the work that you have done and H&P has done has allowed us as a country to be much better positioned than a lot of others who, quite frankly, there's a lot of other nations out there who are held hostage because of their need for energy that they can't produce themselves.
It's a great observation, and I think you're absolutely right. And you mentioned the rare earth issue. I mean, that is a real national threat and something we should be concerned about. Having the energy is a huge advantage. And so, no, I think running, we take for granted, but running a modern economy, and when you think of the world economy, using over 100 million barrels of oil a day, we have added lots of renewable energy, but that is intermittent. And so in lots of ways, you have to be able to duplicate that energy provision. And so it's complicated, but it really does have strategic import to be able to support a modern economy.
And I think a lot of people wouldn't be aware, but H&P is on the forefront of some renewable activities, especially in the area of thermo activities, where you're using H&P's drilling technology to potentially create this closed loop of permanent energy utilization in certain parts of the country that would be clean and continuous.
Yeah, I think that geothermal work that we do is exciting and interesting. And like you said, it is by nature renewable. You're tapping into the earth generated heat, and you're using that to create electricity. And so there's some exciting projects like that. And it kind of speaks to something that you mentioned earlier, just an innovative spirit and the ability to problem solve and find solutions. It really has been a great story for America, but really for the advancement of the type of living standard we enjoy around the world and the betterment of the human experience around the world. So energy's in the middle of that story and an important part of that story.
Well, Hans, the CEO Forum had a little bit of a touch in your business. When I left the Olympics, Mac McQuiston asked me if I would be willing to do some consulting work for the CEO Forum, which was just kind of getting started at that time. I think it had about 60 members. And it really started developing quickly when it was taken out of focus on the family. And you were involved in the forum. And the interesting thing is that I spent time with you, but there was also a CEO in Washington, D.C. that was president of a placement firm. And I was working with him. And at the same time, I'd been working with Kevin. And the fellow who was president of the research firm said, do you have anybody you can recommend to this company to be on your board? And he told me what you were looking for. And so I said, well, I think a good match would be Kevin Crampton. So he suggested Kevin to you, and you interviewed Kevin, and here you are. He's interviewing you on for YouTube. So it's interesting how that triangle played out.
Isn't that a great kind of small world story? But it makes me think in all of our stories and in our life, we can see relationships that get put together and then sometimes circle back around. And I tell people all the time, I don't think we're that good, or I'm certainly not that smart. I think there's a sovereign hand in all of that, right? That there's this notion that God is relational, and so he wants a very real and personal relationship with each of us. But then he also is a big promoter of relationships on a vertical level between one another, and for us to be connected to one another's lives. And so I think that's a great example of that, Dick. And I had a great experience at the forum, and I remember, it was Blackaby, right? That was, I was in a Bible study with Henry Blackaby, and of course I'm a big fan of his. He wrote the book Experiencing God, and then he wrote another great book about hearing God. But that forum did great work, and you played a great role in that. And I remember Dale Jones helping us find Kevin, and he was exactly what his experience, and really just one of the things, I'm very proud of our board. And, one of the things you look for is great experience, great business judgment, great character, a value system that is going to fit, because the chemistry is so important when you're working on difficult things together. So yeah, I was very happy that we were able to recruit Kevin with Dale's help. And it's fun to hear your role in that. And, another name you might remember from that was, do you remember Paul Spence that was in the forum? Paul and I were good friends. They did a lot of work for us when we were building the fleet out and building flex rigs. And Paul had a great company that was really our lead supplier in that. And there was years and times when we were building 3 rigs a month or 4 rigs sometimes a month. And I used to work closely with Paul, and we would laugh and we'd say, this feels like Lucy and I Love Lucy at the chocolate factory. It was going so fast. We were trying to keep up with it all. But Paul was a great partner in that effort. But yeah, I appreciate that work you did with the CEO Forum. I think that's a great example of kind of men connecting and helping one another and encouraging one another. And that's a great effort.
Yeah, and it's, what it does, it makes it very clear that the Lord has a plan for our lives, and he has a way of weaving them all together, people who trust him and have him as your private consultant too. So it's a good story, and it shows a good combination.
It really is an important message, I think, to younger people today. I'm encouraging people all the time, hey, find someone twice your age that you can glean experience and wisdom from, and some life lesson. At some point the math doesn't work, but the point is, find a mentor. And I love asking young people, well, tell me about the mentors in your life. And some of those stories are just so impactful and rich. And, a lot of times you and Kevin have had a long relationship, and Kevin, uses you as a great example of a mentor. But sometimes it can be someone that just comes in for a shorter period and encourages you, or says something that awakens something in you that becomes an important motivator. So there's no doubt in my mind that kind of in this kingdom business that we're supposed to be connected, and we're supposed to not only have friendships, but we're supposed to have friendships that go beyond just our peers, and where we're benefiting from age-old wisdom and experience. And so all of that is a very important part of the puzzle that I try to encourage young people to look for and try to connect with.
Well, that's really important, because one of the strongest witnesses we can have is the way we live our lives and relate to other people. And that can have a big impact on young people at an early age.
Yeah, that's right. And, I know part of your story as a coach and your role with the Olympics. And I mean, the impact, and all of us can say this, I've had coaches just make a great impact in my life. And it's true with other, whether it's a scoutmaster or Sunday school teacher. I like the idea of sharing your friends, and a lot of times we can help connect people that we know would be a good fit, particularly to young people. And then, there's that notion when it talks about honoring your father, it also says in the Proverbs, honor your father's friends. And when you live in a culture that so many young men don't have that opportunity with the father, or really, there's a study that Harvard put out just about the loneliness crisis of men that self-describe as, hey, I don't have a close friend, right? And it's called a crisis because the number of people that say they don't have close friends has just skyrocketed just in the last 10 or 15 years. So I think what we're talking about is really important today, of being able to connect with other men, particularly people that care about you, that want to see you do well, and that you can ask them, hey, how did you figure this out when you were more my age? Or what? Really, it's a lot of what drives this podcast, Kevin. Just what have you learned, or what are the experiences you can glean from your own life story? So I think it's a real important effort to engage in.
That's right. I learned one fact very early in my career when I was the basketball coach of Iowa. I would say that 50% of the athletes that we would try to recruit didn't have a father in the home. They maybe had a strong mother, but no father. And they were really hungry to go to school someplace where they thought the coach could replace their father in some way. And so, I found myself to be becoming a father to a lot of young men who really needed fatherly care outside of just teaching them how to be a good basketball player.
Well, there's no doubt. And I mentioned to you that I had known Mr. Iba, and I had a great experience when I was asked. Mr. Iba had young men work for my granddad on rigs, and then for my dad. And then in 72, he asked me, I was 13 years old at the time, to be the water boy on the 72 Olympic team. And so that was just a great thrill. And that was the Munich games. Yeah, it was I know Kevin's an athlete, and you've been involved with athletics your whole life. So, my best athletic story is being a water boy, but it was the highlight of what I experienced as a young man. But you made me think of him because so many of his players talk about what you just said, Dick, that he was more than a coach to them, that he was really like a father to them, and they knew he cared about them, and they stayed connected to him the rest of their lives, and they just had a great amount of respect and honor for the man because of the way he cared for them.
Well, it's interesting that you would say that, because here I am, 96 years old, and I still get phone calls from some of my players, even some players that I coached in high school, and they just call and they just want to talk. And so that's a blessing to me, because it tells me that I did something positive for them in their life.
Well, it really, that testimony of people reaching out to you and the impact that you've had, it really is a validation of you brought more than just your knowledge of the game. You brought a real concern and willingness to care for them and help them as young men. And I love asking the question to young people, tell me when you were encouraged one time. Tell me when someone validated you. Tell me when someone really said something. And it's amazing that we can remember, and oftentimes the stories are 20, 30, 40 plus years ago. We can remember a word of encouragement spoken in season that really helped shape our life, really provided direction or a motivation for us to do things in life. And so I'm not surprised at all, Dick, that you get those phone calls even today. And I think you should really appreciate what a great honor that is, that it shows the impact you've had on so many people's lives.
Well, Hans, it's important even as a CEO, and it doesn't, when you have a large organization like you have and that I had at the NCAA and the Olympics, when you have 500, 600 or 700 employees, it's a challenge to be able to communicate with all of them, but you have your direct reports. And I felt that those people, and I think CEOs generally do, we need to really educate them, and we really need to spend time with them and encourage them in their desires to move up. And I always like to have people that were interested in improving and moving up, not people that just wanted to have a comfortable job and to live in it. So I think part of our challenge as CEOs is motivating the people that work for us and maintaining their interest and increasing their interest in being a person who has some worth in their life other than just the amount of money they make.
No, I think all of that is so true. You made me think, Dick, about one of our board members was Bill Nauman. Bill was the CEO and chairman of Caterpillar. He was written up in Tom Peters' book, Good to Great. But I remember one time taking Bill out to the airport and him making a very similar point to what you said. And his comment was, and we've probably heard it before, but it was great to hear it from someone running a company like Caterpillar. He said, people want to know how much you care before they care how much you know. People want to know how much you care before they care how much you know. And it just kind of it speaks to that basic trust. And I like to encourage our folks that, the word culture gets thrown around a lot. It's a very important thing. But a lot of times your culture is really the quality of the conversations you're having. It's the transparency, the honesty, the openness of those conversations. If you're in a culture that there are guardrails or watchouts, oh, you can't have that kind of conversation, or we don't really talk to, I like the notion, you mentioned bigness, and you've been around, and Kevin has too, big organizations. There are some advantages to that. I always like to think, okay, how can we take advantages of being big and some of the economies of scale and some of the efficiencies? But we can do that. But how do we think small? Inside of a big organization, how do we continue to think small? And in our business, the example was, we used to be small enough that we knew all the rig managers by name, all the superintendents by name. We knew if their kids were having problems. We knew if their wife was sick. Let's not get so big that we don't care and that we're not still connected and that we're not having important personal conversations. And so I think we've lost some of that in kind of the bigness of corporate America, but I think people are really interested in finding those types of work experiences and those types of places where they feel like people care about them.
Yeah. Well, we did a simple thing at the NCAA and the Olympics that really told me how important it was to be able to relate to the people that work for you. when you have large staffs, it's hard to do one-on-one. So what we did, we took their birthdays. Everybody that birthday was in January, we meet with them all together, and we'd have a cup of coffee and some donuts or something, and we'd go around the room and ask each individual to tell us what they were doing, what they liked to do, what they didn't like to do, what they thought about the direction of the organization. And it was amazing how that helped that community, because by the time we got through the calendar, we'd had that situation with every employee. Now, sometimes there were big groups, sometimes there were small groups, but it really encouraged them to be dedicated workers. And there's a lot of simple things that people can do in larger organizations that make them feel like a small organization.
I think one of the things that doesn't, irrespective of the size of the organization and irrespective of where you are in the world, people want two things. They want to be loved and they want to be respected.
Yeah.
That's universal. Big organizations, little organizations, Asia, South America, US, Europe, they all want that. Now, there's always a slight differences, but they all want those things. I think it's because it's an innate human desire. I think it's a God-given desire of wanting to be loved and to share love with others. And I think respecting people is part of that, is part of demonstrating love for people when you show respect for them. And the thing you two guys do well, you two guys are great listeners. Dick's a great listener. Hans, you are a great listener. I am so impressed. Whenever I watch Hans, I watch you closely, Hans, you are a fabulous listener. And that is a critical success skill for those roles, those key executive roles. And it's one that few people practice, unfortunately.
That's really important.
Well, that's a high compliment, and I think it's so important I haven't always done that well, and I've appreciated people that have reminded me of that and called me out on it. But that notion of deep listening, active listening, really kind of participatory listening, where you want to make sure you're getting not just what words you're hearing, but you're really getting the story right and even the emotions behind it right. Boy, it's just such an important relationship tool. So it means a lot that you would say that. Thank you, Kevin. We are just wired to desire to be loved and respected. And it's just such an important insight. And I think it has such important kind of life lesson, even in a spiritual realm. You know, I love an important aspect of Jesus's message was describing God as a father. And that was a little bit revolutionary then, in the notion that he would describe God as a father. But of course, so often through the Gospels, he does that very thing. And so that's the aspect of being loved the way a son or a daughter would be loved by a heavenly father. Then that part about respect, you know, there's such a great message, and Jesus talks about it over and over, about he says, even now my Father is working, and I too am doing his work and accomplishing his purpose. He says later in John 4, I think it is, where he says, you know, my food is to do the work and will of my Father and to accomplish his purpose. And then, of course, he could say on the cross that he had finished that work and that he had done exactly what he was sent to do, to be a mediator between man and God. But that notion is so important to me, and it ties into what I think you were talking about with respect, is that God would use us to be a co-laborer in what he's doing today on the earth. And when Jesus has said, I'm doing his work, he said, I'm doing what I hear him saying, and I'm going where he tells me to go. But the fact that as believers and in our faith, that we can have that love and the respect, I'm often just taken by surprise. Really? You want us to do the work of the kingdom? You want us to, but he does. He wants to use our hands and feet and our eyes. So I love that notion. And I think you're absolutely right. That notion of love and respect. And we really participate that in our relationship with God as Father.
Well said.
Well said. Thanks, Hans. Hans, this has been great. Thanks for joining Dick and I on Toon Talks. It's been a great discussion. Appreciate your time. And look forward. Oh, one other thing. I got to ask you one question, though. Okay, before we leave. Okay.
Hey, it's been
because my brother-in-law is in Austin.
Sure.
And my favorite time of the board meetings I go to, Dick, is we have barbecue.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. I love Tulsa barbecue. But my brother-in-law says Austin barbecue is better. So I want to know, as a proud Tulsan, is Tulsa barbecue the best?
I think we need to bring your brother to Tulsa and just have, yeah, just have a head-to-head competition, because I know Austin, and there are other places that are proud of their barbecue, but yeah, I would love to host him, and we can let him decide if he thinks Austin is better or not. I'm not worried. I have a pretty good confidence level in it. Hey, well, this has been so much fun for me, and I love your guys' relationship. Kevin, you've got a great book that I hope gets lots of readership, because it's just a great message of someone who had great success both in their faith and in their careers, and the two aren't separated. They really, it's one calling, and that message comes out so strongly in your book, and it was an encouragement to me. But this has been fun for me to be with you both, and so thanks for hosting me.
All right, Hans, thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay, thanks very much. Thanks, Dick.